gentlemen, it's Eric Coffin. It is Monday, the 19th of October, 2020. I'm here with Alistair Waddell. He is the CEO of Inflection Resources, AUCU on the venture, AUCU at OTC. And I think you guys are listening. You guys listen on Frankfurt now? I think you are, right?
We are just about, yes.
Okay. And
thinly traded, to say the least.
You put out a release this morning. It was similar to one last month, where one of the targets, and for viewers that don't know, Inflection is in the midst of a very large sort of first pass targeting program on these blind targets in the Macquarie Arc in New South Wales, and the idea is they're basically looking for large porphyry centers. And you put out a release last month talking about a potential new porphyry discovery, and then you put out another release this morning on yet another one. This is a different target now, several kilometers from one last month. Now I realize that most people looking at these releases are going to go, whatever, technobabble, jargon, geology stuff, 23 syllable words. Can you, and I know that you guys are quite pumped about both these targets, especially the one you put out this morning. Can you just sort of walk us through what you're doing with this program? I think maybe if people understand what the process is here, they'll have a better grasp of why you guys are so excited about it.
Yeah, so Eric, maybe stepping back a little bit here. I mean, what we're doing here, we're testing essentially 20 very large targets in the northern extension of the Macquarie Arc, and this is a belt of relatively young volcanic rocks, which has hosted some very big mines, most notably Newcrest's Cadia Ridgeway operation. We have the China Moly North Parks mine. This is a big porphyry copper mine. And we have Evolution Mining's Cowell operation. So these are huge tier 1 scale deposits in this belt of rocks, and the belt of rocks disappears under this younger sedimentary cover that's masking all the underlying prospective geology. And of the 20 targets that we've developed, for the most part, they're intrusion related or porphyry type targets. And what we're doing here is completing a first pass program of 38 holes across the 20 targets, very much scout drilling type holes, really just looking for fabled alteration. These porphyry type systems in which we're exploring for generally have a large alteration footprint. So they're generally quite, there's nothing particularly subtle about them. We're not chasing something narrow like a vein. These are big bulk mineable targets that extend over kilometers, and certainly the alteration halo in broad terms, it sort of forms in concentric rings around these mineralized ore bodies. And we're using this sort of first pass drill program to essentially see if we can zone in on some particular targets. And as you mentioned, Eric, we've had a bit of success already. We identified one that we announced last month called Myla Mundi, and a second one which we announced just this morning called Trangi. And what we've actually hit is an alteration type that's very indicative of being in the close proximity of a porphyry. So we're seeing veinlets of quartz magnetite with little bits of chalcopyrite and pyrite. We're seeing chlorite, epidote, actinolite, and a whole host of different minerals which you can read about in our press release. But the point is, we've interpreted that to be the fact we're in close proximity to where we need to be. We haven't hit the home run. The market didn't maybe appreciate what we've done, because it is quite a technical story and quite a technical release. But certainly we're very excited in the fact we've hit exactly what we were hoping to hit within the first few scout holes. And the challenge now is where we go from here. And stepping out from these early holes and see if we can actually hit the main porphyry itself.
And when you say, and I realize I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but when you say close proximity, I mean, what does that mean in practice?
So these alteration halos are typically kilometers in scale. So we could be anything from 100 meters to a couple of kilometers away, but we certainly believe we're closer than that. based on the alteration assemblage in which we're seeing it in the core. But obviously that is the $1 million question, you know, how far away? And what we're doing, Eric, is we're using some relatively new technology to analyze the very specific minerals that we're identifying in the core. So in particular, there's a mineral called chlorite and another one called epidote, in which we can use some very smart technology to actually look at the metal content and ratios of metal in these individual minerals. And with that, we can use that to calculate more or less where we are in terms of distance or proximity to potential mineralization. So we're using cutting edge technology developed out of well, various places, but mostly out of Australia and the UK for the most part. Right. But certainly it's leading to some intriguing ideas, and it's given us a fair degree of confidence that we're on the right track.
Now, in both of these targets, I know you already have a Mile Monday, and I assume Trangie is going to be the same, where you're basically applying for another set of drill permits that's essentially, and I don't think it's grid drilling, but they're much more closely spaced holes. I mean, you've been doing holes that are like kilometers apart so far.
Yeah.
Can you just give us a bit of insight to, you know, how does this actually work in terms of vectoring? How do you use what you see in these different holes to point you in the right direction?
Yeah, so there's a whole host of different things. You know, the two targets themselves are about 6 kilometers apart, so we believe they're related to separate systems. But in terms of the step out holes, they're both a little bit different, but broadly we're stepping out on 250 and then 500 meter step outs. If you imagine a sort of a broad 5-spot sort of pattern around a sort of a central hole, right. That's sort of what we're doing. There's a little bit more geoscience involved than just a straight step out, but ultimately that's the model. And then we do a number of things. We obviously can visually log the core, and that will give us you know, basic mineral identification and alteration, and give us a sense whether we're getting warmer or cooler. And so that'll be a key point. Once we have multiple data points, we can start inferring a lot more. But to do that, we can also look at the traditional geochemistry. We've been doing some very interesting things with the early geochemistry as well on that. But in addition to that, it's this sort of green rock vectoring, looking specifically at these epidotes and chlorites and things, and that's just given us a whole other level of detail. But the key is having multiple data points, and right now, you know, we've got one key data point. Yeah. We need sort of a few more points so we can really then decide which direction we need to go. But we certainly, based on the what we're seeing in the core so far, you know, we're in the ballpark.
You're essentially playing Battleship with a drill. and hoping for an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, something like that. A little bit more science involved, but okay. Absolutely.
Okay. So, and the drill permitting process here it's fairly routine. I understand in New South Wales it's not that onerous. Very
much so. So it is a little bit of a process, but it is a true process. You know, it takes between 4 and 6 weeks. Right. To get these permits through. The key part of it is getting landowner permission. Once the landowner signs off, you pay a little environmental type bond. You register that with the provincial government, the state government, should I say. And then, yes, there's a whole series of things, forms and whatnot you got to fill in, but it's just a fairly standard procedure. And
I think you're dealing with a relatively small number of landowners, given the scale of the project, because you're basically dealing with these big cattle stations and sheep stations, like gigantic operations.
Yeah, exactly. These are big commercial farms, Eric. You know, we're not dealing with like little landowners for the most part. I mean, the Mile Monday target, I think it's a large cotton plantation that extends for many, many kilometers, and same with Trangie. And the further north you go, it gets to be more sort of classic Australian bushland, sort of cattle country and sheep country for the most part.
And I think your drill costs, the way that you're doing this, and I understand that's the intent. You just want to get through these. You want to get through the cover, and then as cheap as you can, get a few tens of meters into the underlying rock, and use that to to vector with, so you're not drilling these giant deep holes right now. Your drill cost is pretty modest, I understand.
That's right. That's a key part of the strategy, Eric, for sure. I mean, we are able to test a lot of targets for a relatively small amount of capital. We're drilling each individual hole to a depth of around about 220 meters. It seems to be the spot right now. We're using what we call mud rotary drilling to get through the sedimentary cover. Right. And then the same rig transitions into diamond drilling. So it's a very sort of seamless process. And for each individual hole, it's costing us around about 18,000 Australian dollars right now. So this is very, very cost-effective exploration. And we're able to cover a lot of ground. And they say these 20 big targets we've got, they extend over about 200 kilometers. And, you know, this is really a tremendous initiative to be able to test so many targets so cost-effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great story. I mean, you've always been very straight up with shareholders that this is, you know, this isn't a low risk exploration program. It's a high risk, high reward. Don't put your last penny into it. Don't sell your mother-in-law unless you want to. But it's one of those ones where this belt is famous for having very, very large porphyries and very gold rich porphyries. So obviously the idea is if you tag into a Macquarie Arc style deposit, you're probably going to be onto something that someone's going to mine someday.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a a very key point as well, and part of the reason why we really like this part of the world. We're in a belt of rocks where the majors ultimately want to own mines, and that's really you can see that by who's exploring in the belt. It's Rio Tinto, it's Anglo American, it's BHP, it's Freeport, Fortescue, Newmont. All the big guys are already in the belt looking for this very specific type of deposit, which we're targeting. So, you know, we're not doing this in Timbuktu where there's only a handful of individuals around the world that will go and build a mine. Right. We're in the backyard of some of the world's biggest mines, and ultimately where the majors want to own their mines.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great story. I mean, I love stuff like this, high risk, high reward. It's, you know, the whole point of this first phase program was to do this kind of vectoring. I mean, you know, obviously the possibility is always there that you guys trip over something and get into bedrock and boom, you're in one of these things. But I know from day one, the idea was always that you were going to have to vector in once you get into one of these alteration halos. But I think it's a great story. I know you guys still have $4 million left, which at 18,000 a crack is a hell of a lot of drill holes. So you don't need to do any financing, nothing like that. It's just straight up wait for the drill results to come in. Great story. Inflection Resources, AUCU on the venture. Thanks for coming by, Alistair.
Great. Thanks for having us, Eric.